Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, Phoebe MacAdams will read the poetry of Joanne Kyger, and then Judy Oberlander will read the poetry of Snyder. Phoebe MacAdams was born and raised in New York City, but has mostly lived in California. She moved to LA in 1986 with the poets James Cushing, the late Holly Prado, Harry Northup, and Jeanette Clough. She is a member of Caoimhe Press. She taught English at Roosevelt High School in Boyle Heights until her retirement in 2011. She has published 7 books of poetry, the last 5 with Caoimhe Press, including in 2016, her new and selected volume, The Large Economy of the Beautiful. In 2017, Beyond Broke published Every Bird Helps, a cancer journal. According to Amelie Frank, what she reports back to us from her daily pilgrimages should give us hope. Truth and beauty are at hand everywhere we look and always just as we need it most. She lives in Pasadena with her husband, Ron Ozuna. Joanne Kyger, 1934-2017, was the author of over 30 books of poetry and prose. She was associated with the poets of the San Francisco Renaissance, the Beat Generation, Black Mountain, and the New York School. Although Kyger is often characterized as a prominent female beat poet in the predominantly male inner circle of Beat Generation writers, she never considered herself as belonging to the Beat movement, nor did she formally identify with any other movement. Linda Russo, in the webzine Jackets edition devoted to Kyger, notes that, quote, "There is no one way to talk about her work except as that of a singular individual." Kyger's early poetry was influenced by Charles Olson's projective verse concept of letting breath and open construction, rather than rhyme and syntax, guide poetic composition. This influence continued to shape her mature work. In a 2010 interview, Kyger says, quote, "You want to make it so that someone could say it. I try to score the lines for the page with that in mind, the breathing, the timing," end of quote. Lewis MacAdams describes Kyger as from the, quote, "school of backyard poets who look out their kitchen windows and see the universe," end of quote. Kyger's poems emerge from a daily literary practice of recording thoughts, events, and dreams. Most of the poems are dated, either in the title or at the end. Much like journals, they include everything from philosophical musings to the weather. Quote, "I think of notebook writing like a practice. I try and do it whether I have anything good or bad or interesting to say. And the chronology becomes the narrative, a history of a writing self," end of quote. Kyger lived in Bolinas, California, and occasionally taught at the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics at the Naropa Institute in Colorado. Here's the wonderful Phoebe MacAdams.
I have a cold, and if I suddenly have a talking fit, Harry will leap in and take over for me. But hopefully that won't happen. A little sip of tea. I moved to Bolinas in 1970, and there got to know Joanne Kyger. It's hard to know how to talk about her. Astonishing poet, wonderful friend, locus of the poetic spirit of Bolinas, beloved by all who knew her, including about 400 of whom made it to Bolinas for her memorial there. Many more went to Boulder for a memorial at Naropa, as well as one in New York City. She was mourned all over the world. I don't think there was anyone whom Joanne could not talk to. A few favorite images. S.A. Griffin told me that Joanne befriended him at a boring poetry reading some years ago. He was feeling uncomfortable, and at the back of the stage, while the poet was droning on, she started a quiet conversation with him where they sat, giggling and passing notes. I love to think of that. And then there was a gathering at my house where she came down here to read at Beyond Baroque. She didn't know folks down here particularly well, but I looked outside at one point and there was Jim Cushing on his knees in front of her. And I thought, oh my God, Jim is proposing to her. I think it was worship, not a proposal. While all the festivities were going on, Joanne also herded us to my computer to work on a 7-page collaboration. And that is another thing about Joanne. She had such a brilliantly light touch that one may forget the sheer volume of work she produced and the steely discipline that coexisted with that light touch. There must be more than 50 books and chapbooks, including the 800-page collected poems that came out in 2007, as well as several volumes after that. Ron Silliman calls her one of our hidden treasures, the poet who really links the beats, the Spider Circle in San Francisco, the Black Mountain poets, the Bolinas poets, the New York School and Language poets, and the only poet that can be said to do all of the above. As Harry said, Kyger's poems emerged from a daily literary practice of recording thoughts, events, dreams. Most of the poems are dated, either in the title or the end. Much like journals, they include everything from philosophical musings to the weather. Joanne describes her work this way, quote, "The shape of the day, the words of the moment, what's happening around me in the world of interior and exterior space, these are my writing concerns. Living in a semi-rural environment, the cast of characters in my poems are often quail, deer, raccoons, coyote bush, oaks, the ocean, the weather, and a few treasured friends. All are equally valid in the environment of place. Some talk more than others. My attention to writing is a daily practice which then builds an accumulative narrative of chronology, which ends up as the story of one's life." September. The grasses are light brown, and ocean comes in long shimmering lines under the fleet from last night, which dozes now in the early morning. Here and there, horses graze on somebody's acreage. Strangely, it was not my desire that bade me speak in church to be released, but memory of the way it used to be in careless and exotic play, when characters were promises, then recognitions. The world of transformation is real and not real, but trusting. Enough of these lessons, I mean didactic phrases to take you in and out of love's mysterious bonds. Well, I myself am not myself, and which power of survival I speak for is not made of houses. It is inner luxury of golden figures that breathe like mountains do, and whose skin is made dusky by stars. That one is dated, it was not dated. I don't want to repeat the same mistakes over again, or the mistakes somebody else made, just so I can have the experience of them. See, fucked up again, live and learn. And off the excessive fondness for one's own self-knowledge, untested, but reigning supreme, that leads me more astray every day. What we commonly know in the air, in our dreams, what chooses continually to grow, the obvious under our noses, is this life. Yearning is blindness. The weed has a name, is quite proud of itself, builds a community with other weeds. Birds hop through. The imported domestic is a labor of love, but a labor, such a labor. At home here, no single thought is my thought. It whispers through the air in sweet, misty fog, in bright, sky blue. The fog is halfway over the mesa, 2001. My table of life for the past 30 years or so is not broken up into incidents as much as continuum. So much for the skill of living the outer life of season, while the inner buttress certainly becomes no wiser. Have you heard this 1,000 times before from anybody and everybody? And that's it? Except you allow the rapid combine of elements heretofore disparate, like Bodhidharma cruising the Pacific as a surfboarding coyote, or the poor Bogdan head disciple of Naropa here to meet him, along with the classic Greco-Roman education that always holds Odysseus along, probably the oldest of the lot, but none of it indigenous to here except through conviction of the poet, combining these strands into a useful cord, a thread to throw into the dream and see it come up clear as a picture in the evening. This one is dated 1975. Out the window. April 4th, 1975. Time of wonder on how it goes together. And pausing to see the same landscape, only changed by progression of time. Waiting to be moved by the impulses of heaven. To have the chance funnel descend into the grassy bird-lit day, and so much talk of the heart and the breath is nothing if not practiced in this helter-skelter, in this wandering wound. So much sorrow winds around me ridiculously. This sweet refuge of home won't give up, is compounded of hard objects, of floating mind, shelter, walls, tin-hearted memories, chemicals. We fight incredibly through a hideous mishmash of inheritance, forgiving for deeper stamina. That we go on, the world always goes on, breaking us with its changes until our form, exhausted, runs true. And this one is from 1992. I've been jumping all over the place. I wanted to give a picture of the concerns of her community. Ocean Parkway, which is a street in Bolinas that runs along the coast and from which you can see the water. Ocean Parkway gazing. Ocean up against cliff, long thin roll of surf over the longest shale reef on the north coast. And way out, tiny point is buoy, is light at night, signaling danger. But this morning is peaceful, just light movement of breezes, cool caress like a nursery song, flat, glimmering, gliding surface, past Echium's purple plumes, in hues sodded with bees, catching a morning breakfast. The coast range rises light, mossy green, and in its folds, dark design of fir, redwood, and pine. Monarchs empower this scene when they land lightly in their cruise for nectar. Poison oak just a yard away. The voice describes the scene, looks up for reference, listens to two song sparrows carry out their call and response as the hissy light waves roll over changing continuum. The minutes go by the sea closes in up to the edge of mythology. And now I'm going to read the first and last poems. I was actually thinking about reading this whole book, but that was sort of too much. This is a book called 2012, and it's a little chapbook from Blue Press, which kind of takes you through the year 2012. So I'm going to read the first and the last poem. Wild currant is blooming pink, the Odyssey by random chance. You are in search of some simple way to reach your home, but the old gods reach out with their stories and resentments, and so your journey will be troublesome and frankly endless, for you will go on to meet people who have never heard of you, caught inland by the outgoing long tide, where you will find a place to plant some seeds and tell your story all over, and give a bit of sacrifice so those dead ones can speak again. That's from February, and this is December 30th. Seeing the old year out. Good Lord, all this teetering on the new definitions of edge. How will we ever get in and out of town when the sea rises through the marshy end of the lagoon, exiled through the change of governments bought and sold by words too shrewd to evaluate? Remember how the heart is always located by its place in the body, at the bottom of a mountain, on the slopes to the sea. Watching it go by as if owned by no one, the watcher sneezes and disappears momentarily. She is forced to watch from behind a curtain. She can't go out by herself to see the red starfish. Longing for the elixir of movement, looking for next year's snake. Now that we're a year older. So open your book and dream what is written. Cough drop. Oh, fresh day in February, coming along with me under pine, whose new cones make flowers. In a mellow mood, let's take anything, and you're better in the peaceful flowing. In the beach, in the bird who flies up out of the coyote bush, bobcat who crosses the road. For who could think I could see the grace of other souls, born and reborn, before in crab shells, snail shells, the head of a grebe, moleskin, new onions up, drawn by your clever sleigh of tortoise, I listen for the melody to sing along. I think I better stop because my throat is really bothering me, but I have two poems that I sent to MPTF of Joanne reading her own poems, which she will read, which we will play now, I hope.
Licenses are still issued for the hunting of the California black bear. 1,500 bears may be killed each season, which ends on December 29th. And this is a bear revenge story, a favorite of Garrison Keillor's, who put it in his book. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it's a book called Good Poems. It's a sandwich board. And Seychelles Miloš, who is a great Czech poet. Destruction. First of all, do you remember the way a bear goes through a cabin when nobody is home? He goes through the front door. I mean, he really goes through it. Then he takes the cupboard off the wall and eats a can of lard. He eats all the apples, limes, dates, bottled decaffeinated coffee, and 35 pounds of granola. The asparagus soup cans fall to the floor. Yum. He chomps up Norwegian crackers stashed for the winter, and the bouillon, salt, pepper, paprika, garlic, onions, potatoes. He rips the green Tara poster from the wall, tries the Coleman mustard, spills the ink, tracks in the flour, goes upstairs and takes a shit, rips soap in the waterbed, eats the incense and drinks the perfume, knocks over the Japanese tansu and the Persian miniature of a man on horseback watching a woman bathing, knocks shelter, whole earth catalog, planet drum, northern myths, truck tracks, and woman's sports into the oozing waterbed mess. He goes downstairs and out the back wall. He keeps on going for a long way and finds a good cave to sleep it all off. Luckily, he ate the whole medicine cabinet, including stash of LSD, peyote, psilocybin, amanita, benzodrine, Valium, and aspirin. We're probably all bears, eh? The crystal in Tamalpais. In Tamalpais is a big crystal. An acquaintance told me the story. A Miwok was giving his grandfather's medicine bag to the Lowy Museum in Berkeley. He said this man took him over the mountain Tamalpais at a certain time in the year. I believe it was about the time of the winter solstice, because then the tides are really low. They stopped and gathered a certain plant on the way over the mountain, on their way to the Bolinas Beach clam patch, where there was a big rock way out there. Go out to the rock, take out of the medicine bag the crystal that matches the crystal in Tamalpais, and if your heart is not true, when you tap the rock in the clam patch, a little piece of crystal will fly off and strike you in the heart and strike you dead. And that's the first story I ever heard about Bolinas. So you know the true hearts.
And I think that Joanne's heart was probably one of the truest. Do we have time for one more little poem, Harry?
Yes.
This is from July 2000. To live in this world again, you must hide yourself. Change your flamboyance to a dull hue. Does this mean I'll never have any fun again? No one will notice you. The gods won't drag you off the earth for their own entertainment. You are camouflaged with simplicity.
What a lovely tribute to your friend Joanne. And she was, as you say, a beloved person. I like her agility and her consciousness, her love of nature, and her paying attention to everyday details, and also going into the myths. And she was one of our greats. And so thank you, Phoebe. Did you want to say anything about Joanne before we go on to your part, Judy?
I'd just like to say I heard Joanne read in San Francisco in 1975, and she was really important to me in learning how to read to the public. She was such an effective reader of her poetry. I could hear her voice for a long time after I saw her.
Well, you know, the man who turned me on to poetry, Leland Hickman, he grew up in Santa Barbara. And I told Joanne that, and she said, yes, we were both writers for the Santa Barbara High School newspaper. We thought we were very sophisticated. And I asked Lee one time about, I'd never seen her read before. I said, what type, how does she read? And he said her reading, it was like a dance.
Yeah.
And so thank you very much, Phoebe. And
Thank you, Harry.
I'm glad you transcended your cold, and I hope you get over it soon.
Thank you. I had a few more, but my throat suddenly began to give me trouble.
You
Thank
did
you,
it.
Harry.
You did it perfectly. And thank you, Phoebe. And now on to Judy Oberlander, who will read the poetry of Gary Snyder. This bio is from Judy, and I'll read it just the way she gave it to me in the first person. I've lived in Ojai for over 50 years, so even though I grew up in Illinois, my home is here next to the mountains and close to the ocean. I first encountered Gary Snyder's poetry in the 60s, and I was deeply influenced by his simple but profound style, as well as his ability to communicate the beauty and mystery of nature. I ordered his collected poems from Blackwell's in Oxford in 1968. In 2007, Gary was a featured reader at the Ojai Poetry Festival, and as an organizer of the festival, I was privileged to spend some time with him and have him sign my copy of the book. Blake and Whitman were my first poetic influences, but Gary's poetry gave me permission to write about my place in the natural world in my own style. You know, when I studied with Ann Stanford, I told her one time that I loved Gary Snyder's poetry, and he dealt with the environment and nature, and Robert Frost was also a pastoral poet, and Stanford said Gary Snyder's a better poet than Robert Frost. And here's the bio that Judy sent me for Gary Snyder, borrowed heavily from Wikipedia. An American man of letters, Gary Snyder is best known as a poet, but he's also an essayist, lecturer, professor emeritus of English at UC Davis, and an environmental activist. He has been described as a poet laureate of deep ecology. He has received many awards, most notably the Pulitzer Prize for Turtle Island, 1974, and the American Book Award for Axe Handles, 1986. His work in his various roles reflects an immersion in both Buddhist spirituality and nature. He has translated literature in English from ancient Chinese and modern Japanese. For many years, Snyder was an academic at the University of California, Davis, and for a time served as a member of the California Arts Council. He was a seminal member of the Beat Poets, serving as the inspiration for the main character of the Dharma Bums. He spent many years in Japan studying Zen. He has continued to write, give readings, and receive awards up to the present. He has lived in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada of Northern California since the 1970s. Much of Snyder's poetry expresses experiences, environments, and insights involved with the work he has done for a living. Logger, fire lookout, steam freighter crew, translator, carpenter, and itinerant poet, among other things. It is filled with images from nature and insights into the cosmos. While his speech patterns have been called common, his poetry is often lyrical, verging on the mystic. And I started reading Snyder in 1966, and I got his book, Rip Rap and Cold Mountain Poems, a chapbook, and I will read as my invocation to the reading that Judy's going to do, his poem Rip Rap, which could be called, in my view, his Poetics. Now, just to give you an idea, or just to give you a quick thing what Rip Rap is, quote, a cobble of stone laid on steep, slick rock to make a trail for horses in the mountains. Rip Rap. Lay down these words before your mind like rocks, placed solid by hands, in choice of place set before the body of the mind, in space and time, solidity of bark, leaf, or wall, rip-rap of things, cobble of Milky Way, straying planets, these poems, people, lost ponies with dragging saddles and rocky surefoot trails. The world's like an endless four-dimensional game of Go, ants and pebbles, in the thin loam, each rock a word, a creek-washed stone, granite ingrained with torment of fire and weight, crystal and sediment linked, but all change in thoughts as well as things. Here's the marvelous Judy Oberlander.
Thank you, Harry. Just a couple more things I would like to say about Gary Snyder is two of the things that I love about his work and that made him really fun to teach is his perspective. A lot of his poems are told from the point of view at being a very high place on top of a mountain or looking down into a valley. And one of a saying from Zen Buddhism is that the experience of emptiness, space, engenders compassion. And I think that's kind of part of his poetry, that feeling of deep space. And the one other thing I really love about his work is his wonderful use of images that aren't just things that you see in your mind, but often will do the work of conjuring up 2 or 3 of the 5 senses. For example, down valley, a smoke haze. You could probably smell, he was a fire lookout. He probably smelled the smoke, he saw the haze. Itch of hay dust in the sweaty shirt and shoes. I mean, you can really feel and see that image. So his poetry is filled with those images that are so, they really grab you and make his work good. And one other thing, I read that he moves between the relative and absolute ways of seeing. And that's very Buddhist. The relative is here and now. The absolute is the big picture. And I like that about him too. First poem I'm going to read is from his early poems from the 1960s, Mid-August at Sourdough Mountain Lookout. Down valley, a smoke haze, 3 days heat after 5 days rain. Pitch glows on the fir cones. Across rocks and meadows, swarms of new flies. I cannot remember things I once read. A few friends, but they are in cities. Drinking cold snow water from a tin cup, looking down for miles through high, still air. Hay for the horses. He had driven half the night from far down San Joaquin, through Mariposa, up the dangerous mountain roads, and pulled in at 8 a.m. With his big truckload of hay behind the barn, with winch and ropes and hooks, we stacked the bales up clean to splintery redwood rafters. High in the dark, flecks of alfalfa whirling through shingle cracks of light. Itch of hay dust in the sweaty shirt and shoes. At lunchtime, under black oak, out in the hot corral, the old mare nosing lunch pails, grasshoppers crackling in the weeds. I'm 68, he said. I first bucked hay when I was 17. I thought that when I started, I sure would hate to do this all my life. And damn it, that's just what I've gone and done. Kyoto, March. A few light flakes of snow fall in the feeble sun. Birds sing in the cold. A warbler by the wall. The plum buds tight and chill soon bloom. The moon begins first forth, a faint slice west at nightfall. Jupiter halfway high at the end of night meditation. The dove cry twangs like a bow. At dawn, Mount He dusted white on top. In the clear air, folds of all the gullied green hills around the town are sharp. Breath stings. Beneath the roofs of frosty houses, lovers part. From tangle warm of gentle bodies under quilt, and crack the icy water to the face, and wake and feed the children and grandchildren that they love. This next poem is from Turtle Island, for which he got the Pulitzer Prize, by Fraser Creek Falls. Standing up on lifted, folded rock, looking out and down, the creek falls to a far valley. Hills beyond that, facing, half forested, dry, clear sky, strong wind in the stiff, glittering needle clusters of the pine. Their brown, round truck bodies straight, still, rustling, trembling limbs and twigs. Listen. This living, flowing land is all there is, forever. We are it. It sings through us. We could live on this earth without clothes or tools. Avocado. The teachings of the Buddha are called the Dharma. The Dharma is like an avocado. Some parts so ripe you can't believe it. But it's good. And other places hard and green without much flavor, pleasing those who like their eggs well cooked. And the skin is thin. The great big round seed in the middle is your own original nature, pure and smooth. Almost nobody ever splits it open or ever tries to see if it will grow. Hard and slippery, it looks like you should plant it, but then it shoots out through the fingers, gets away. For the children, the rising hills, the slopes of statistics lie before us. The steep climb of everything going up, up, as we all go down. In the next century, or the one beyond that, they say are valleys, pastures. We can meet there in peace if we make it. To climb these coming crests, one word to you and your children. Stay together, learn the flowers, go light. This poem is from the book Regarding Wave. It's called What You Should Know to Be a Poet. All you can about animals as persons. The name of trees and flowers and weeds. Names of stars and the movements of the planets and the moon. Your own six senses with a watchful and elegant mind. At least one kind of traditional magic. Divination, astrology, the book of changes, the tarot. Dreams, the illusory demons and illusory shining gods. Kiss the ass of the devil and eat shit. Fuck his horny barbed cock. Fuck the hag and all the celestial angels and maidens perfumed and golden. And then love the human, wives, husbands, and friends. Children's games, comic books, bubble gum, the weirdness of television and advertising. Work, long dry hours of dull work, swallowed and accepted and lived with and finally loved. Exhaustion, hunger, rest. The wild freedom of the dance, ecstasy. Silent, solitary illumination, ecstasy. Real danger, gambles, and the edge of death. What you should know to be a poet. Taking the drink. Like Phoebe, I've had voice issues this week. I think I'm going to make it. This poem is called, appropriately after the last one, How Poetry Comes to Me. It comes blundering over the boulders at night. It stays frightened outside the range of my campfire. I go to meet it at the edge of the light. And I'm going to spend the rest of the reading from the book Dangers on Peaks, which is one of his last published book of poems. I think it's pretty amazing that Gary Snyder is 91 and he is still writing, I think. Phoebe and I both saw him at Mono Lake a couple of years ago. He was participating in a reading there. He spent an entire lifetime doing this, and it's pretty amazing. In addition to his amazing poetry, he has written wonderful essays about ecology and nature, and he's really an inspiration in many ways. The inspiration for this book was Mount St. Helens. And for Gary Snyder, Mount St. Helens was an important mountain. He grew up in that area, looking at it his entire young life. He was the first mountain he climbed. The first time he really saw it, got close to it, was when he was 13. He climbed it when he was 15. So he has a whole series of poems. Of course, then in 1980, Mount St. Helens exploded, and he went back to visit it in 2000. So this mountain holds a great deal of symbolic importance for Gary Snyder. Mount St. Helens, Luit, said to be the Indian name. A perfect snow-capped volcanic cone rising from almost sea level to 9,677 feet back then. I always wanted to go there. Hidden on the north side, perched in a basin, is a deep, large lake. Spirit Lake. When I first saw Spirit Lake, I was 13. It was clear and still. Faint wisp of fog on the smooth, silvery surface, encircled by steep hills of old fir. The paved road ended at the outlet right by the Spirit Lake Lodge. A ways down the dirt road was a little shingle Forest Service ranger station. Farther down was a camp. Looking out on the lake and across, only forested hills, cool silence. South of the ranger station, a dirt road climbed steadily up to a lighter, drier zone. 3 miles to timberline. The mountain above the lake. They reflected each other. Maybe the mountain in the lake survives. When he was 15, he climbed Mount St. Helens. West Coast snow peaks are too much. They are too far above the surrounding lands. There is a break between. They are in a different world. If you want to get a view of the world you live in, climb a little rocky mountain with a neat small peak. But the big snow peaks pierce the realm of clouds and cranes. Rest in the zone of 5 colored banners and writhing, crackling dragons in veils of ragged mist and frost crystals into a pure transparency of blue. St. Helens summit is smooth and broad, a place to nod, to sit and write, to watch what's higher in the sky and do a little dance. Whatever the numbers say, snow peaks are always far higher than the highest airplanes ever get. I made my petition to the shapely mountain. Please help this life. When I tried to look over and down to the world below, there was nothing there. Atomic Dawn. The day I first climbed Mount St. Helens was August 13th, 1945. Spirit Lake was far from the cities of the valley, and news came slow. Though the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima August 6th, and the second dropped on Nagasaki August 9th, photographs didn't appear in the Portland Oregonian until August 12th. Those papers must have been driven into Spirit Lake on the 13th. Early the morning of the 14th, I walked over to the lodge to check the bulletin board. There were whole pages of the paper pinned up. Photos of a blasted city from the air. The estimate of 150,000 dead in Hiroshima alone. The American scientists quoted saying, "Nothing will grow there again for 70 years. The morning sun on my shoulders, the fir forest smell, the big tree shadows, feet in thin moccasins feeling the ground, and my heart still one with the snow peak. At my back, horrified, blaming scientists and politicians and the governments of the world. I swore a vow to myself, something like, by the purity and beauty and permanence of Mount St. Helens, I will fight against this cruel, destructive power and those who would seek to use it all my life. In 1980, Mount St. Helens exploded, and he wrote a poem about it. I'm just going to read what he said about what it looked like after the explosion. Roiling earth gut trash cloud tephra, 12 miles high. Ash falls like snow on wheat fields and orchards to the east. 500 Hiroshima bombs. In 2000, he visited Mount St. Helens and was able to see it, to see what had happened. This poem is called Pearly Everlasting. Pearly Everlasting is a beautiful native plant with gorgeous little fuzzy ball-shaped flowers. Walk a trail down to the lake. Mountain ash and elderberries red, old growth log bodies blown about, whacked down, tumbled in the new ash wadis. Root maps tipped up, veiled in tall, straight fireweed. Fields of prone logs laid by blast. In line, north, south, down and silvery, limbless, barkless poles. Clear to the alpine ridgetop, all you see is toothpicks of dead trees. Thousands of summers of detritus cycle rest. Hard and dry in the sun, the long life of the tree down yet to go, bedded in bushes of pearly everlasting. Dense white flowers, saplings of bushy, vibrant silver fir. The creek here once was Harmony Falls. The pristine mountain, just a little battered now, the smooth dome gone, ragged crown. The lake was shady yin, now blinding water mirror of the sky. Remembering days of fir and hemlock, no blame to magma or the mountain, and sit on a clean down log at the lake's edge, the water dark as tea. I had asked Mount St. Helens for help the day I climbed it, so seems she did. The trees all lying flat-like after that big party Siddhartha went to on the night he left the house for good. Crowd of young friends whipped from sexy dancing, dozens crashed out on the floor. Angelic boys and girls sleeping it off. A palace orgy of the gods, but what we see is blast zone, sprinkled with clustered white flowers. Do not be tricked by human-centered views, says Dogen. And Siddhartha looks it over, slips away for another forest to really get right down on life and death. If you ask for help, it comes, but not in any way you'd ever know. Thank you, Luit. La Wiyat La, Smoky Mountain. Gracias, Shishi, Grace. Reading two more poems. This one's called Waiting for a Ride. I gave Gary Snyder a ride to the Santa Barbara airport, and we had a great conversation, so I can kind of relate to this. Waiting for a ride. Standing at the baggage passing time, Austin, Texas airport. My ride hasn't come yet. My former wife is making websites from her home. One son seldom seen. The other one and his wife have a boy and girl of their own. My wife and stepdaughter are spending weekdays in town so she can get to high school. My mother, 96, still lives alone, and she's in town too. Always gets her sanity back, just barely in time. My former wife has become a unique poet. Most of my work, such as it is done. Full moon was October 2nd this year. I ate a mooncake, slept out on the deck, white light beaming through the black boughs of the pine. Owl hoots and rattling antlers, Castor and Pollux rising strong. It's good to know that the pole star drifts, that even our present night sky slips away. Not that I'll ever see it. Or maybe I will much later, some far time, walking the spirit path in the sky. That long walk of spirits where you fall right back into the narrow, painful passageway of the bardo. Squeeze your little skull, and there you are again, waiting for your ride. And this last poem is called Envoy, a turning verse for the billions of beings. We have spoken again the unknown words of the spell that purifies the world, turning its virtue and power back over to those who died in wars, in the fields, on the seas, and to the billions of spirits in the realms of form, of no form, or in the realm of hot desire. Hail, all true and grounded beings in all directions, in the realms of form, of no form, or of hot desire. Hail, all noble, woke up, big heart beings. Hail, great wisdom of the path that goes beyond. Maha Prajna Paramita.
Thank you, Judy, for a marvelous reading. You know, we can see that the poetry of Snyder is precise, mindful. He uses real physical details. He employs myths. He has a long-range consciousness. And he has been, and he will always be, my number one choice for the Poet Laureate of the United States. And in 1966, when I began writing poetry, I saw him teach a class on PBS at Berkeley. And he wrote on the blackboard, and after it was all over, I remembered what he wrote, and I wrote it down, and that's always been very important to me. And what he had 3 points. And the first one, what does a poet have to work with? The man and woman who gave him birth, the man or woman he lives with, the work he does, the soil over which he lives, and 2, what is his approach, particular to general and objective correlative. 3, what is his quest for wisdom. And we can see in, especially, those last couple poems, wisdom is one of Gary Snyder's important parts. Phoebe, what would you like to say about Gary Snyder? Do you have your mic on? We can't hear you. Okay, your mic is not working.
Carrie, did we talk about the fact that Gary and Joanne were married?
You just brought it up right there, and that's a good point.
Phoebe can talk to that.
Well, we can all talk about it because, when they were married and they went, I remember reading a piece of in a Bay Area newspaper, and it didn't even identify her name. It just said Gary Snyder married a young Bay Area woman, and so they were together. I don't know how many years were they, 5 or 6 years, and she put up with the male-dominated consciousness.
They got married in Japan. When she went to join him in Japan, they realized that they wouldn't be able to stay together where they wanted to live unless they were married. So they kind of got married in order for them to be together when they were traveling in Japan and staying with people in Japan. And as far as Gary goes, I think he is the voice of the planet for us in this country. He's the voice of California. He's the voice of the redwoods and the trees and the mountains that he loves. And I don't think anybody else is that voice except Gary. That's who he has been for us. And we're extraordinarily fortunate, I think, to have him and to have him still with us.
On the other point, in terms of what you're talking about, I've always wondered whether an urban poet, because so many of us live in the cities these days, and for many years, can be a pastoral poet. But Gary Snyder he was a full human being. You know, someone like a James Dickey who wrote Deliverance about, you know, these guys going into the wilderness. He was a city guy. So Gary Snyder, he's really the whole package.
Mhm.
Judy, what would you like to say? We got a couple more minutes here. Judy Oberlander, would you like to add anything?
I just feel like I said earlier, it's just so amazing the long life that Gary Snyder has had, the productive, not only in poetry, but in all the environmental work that he's done. And I wonder, you know, I think about him, he and the Beatles kind of came to prominence at the same time. And, you know, what happens when you're a celebrity your entire life? And I think that his grounding in Buddhism has really made him a much more grounded person than the other people that have lived their lives with celebrity. You know, I think that it really has made him that kind of person.
Funny, although he is a celebrity, he doesn't behave like a celebrity.
Right.
Well, we all admire Gary Snyder and Joanne Kyger. They've both done extraordinary work, and we admire Phoebe and Judy too for the work you've done in poetry, and not only for your own good poetry, but also the good work you've done for the community, because both of you both lived at Ojai at one time, and you've both given a lot to the poetry community. So, you know, good works are very important to all of us. And so thank you both very much for that. And
Thank you, Harry. And thank you,
Thanks,
Jennifer.
Harry.
And we have one more minute left, and there's Jennifer Clymer, I just want to say one quick thing about Jennifer and the Creative Chaos team. They are, you know, been doing this for almost 2 years. And so we're real thankful to them too for, you know, their expertise and for allowing us. I mean, you know, I know this is redundant, you've heard it again, but to have a poetry show in a motion picture home is really an amazing, I know I'm being redundant, thing to have. So thank you, Jennifer, for, you know, asking me to do this and for all of the great work you and your team have done.
Please know that we will never get tired of hearing that. And it takes a whole team. There are people at the theater right now doing all of the magic behind the switcher and the audio. Amy is about to join us. She hosts on Wednesdays. There's a slew of people that are making sure like the files that we played, the audio files that we played were all prepared.
And Jennifer, please thank Mark for doing that, because I know I sent them to him, and then I thought, well, he'll just play them, but no, he wanted to clean them up and make them really good.
Yeah, Marcus is he is meticulous, and we love that about him. And I will take this opportunity to say the Poetry Hour is wonderful, and we all look forward to it. There are a ton of opportunities that people take advantage of. One of which also Marcus is in the spotlight for this. We've dropped our first podcast. It's on YouTube and it's called Blackfire. It is a sci-fi story about altering fate, written by Tony Lawrence. Tony wrote for, you name the television show in the 60s and 70s, and he wrote for it. Marcus Welby, Bonanza, Twilight Zone, Hawaii Five-0. He continued writing. He loves science fiction. And his wife, and it's a very romantic story, the two of them met on the campus after Tony's wife of over 50 years had passed from Alzheimer's. He is told by somebody, well, you should go meet this new person on campus. They share a cup of coffee. And 2 years later, they get married in the Roddy McDowell Rose Garden. Maddie produced the podcast, and Marcus worked with them to do not just the audio capture, but all of the sound design, all of the music lay-ins, all of the sound effects. So you can look for Blackfire. Blackfire. It's a multi-part podcast that's up on our YouTube page at MPTF Studios. And it's another celebration of tapping into the creative. So please know that, again, we will never get tired of it. There is a team of people that try and make these things come to fruition. Marcus did a great job cleaning up that audio. It sounded perfect on this side. And we all appreciate understanding that that hard work does not go unnoticed.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hopefully we will see you guys next week in the audience for the very special hour that I was about to say Marcus. We just talked about Marcus over and over and over. Harry, give us a little tease for what you've put together for next week.
We're doing a reading to celebrate Veterans Day, and we have poetry from Walt Whitman through Wilford Owen and he's not C.K. Williams, but a lot of great poets who have written about war, and even including Robert Frost. So we look forward to that, and it's an honor to be able to do that. That's Bob Beecher's idea, and so that's next Tuesday.
Great. Thank you guys so much.